When Khushwant was at the Illustrated Weekly, he was the first editor who ever published my poems, so this one is one that I wrote for him. Acid-tongued mischief maker, spotlight stealer, story stalker, salt in the wound, piss taker, punchline grabbing, headline hogger. Not nice, not a nice man to know. Spit in the eye, straight talker, shaker upper, elbow in the ribs, ego breaker, bawdy, shameless, gossip monger, whiskey guzzling, guzzle lover. Not nice, not a nice man to know. Of all the Sikhs he was seeker, pricker of pride, poker and pecker away at the accepted order, sparing neither man nor God, not nice to know, not a nice man at all. Half his heart in Lahore, half in Amritsar, 1 foot in Delhi, 1 in the gutter, son of a gun, and says Soba Singh, malice towards one and all. If you're not expected, don't ring his bell. If you expect to be respected, go to hell. Not a nice man to know, I know. But I wish that I had known him longer. And I wish there were more like him in the world. Not nice to know, but they don't grow on trees, people like him. So it's worth remembering Khushwant Singh. Not nice, but he took us all under his wing. The young, the outspoken, the runaways, the rebels and poets, the broken things. And this is why we gather to sing of him, while he's laughing up there in the place he didn't believe in, drinking a peg or 3 with the boss, who's still not the boss of him. So here's to the man who we know is not nice to know, but we want to know and go on knowing. Khushwant, Khushwant, Khushwant Singh.
So welcome to day 2 of the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival here in a rather grey and depressing day in London. Though our speakers are not all with us today, and one of the great features of this festival is that we are able to go ahead with it despite all the restrictions that we're all currently facing. In fact, I think today's festival really brings out some of the themes that we need to look at during this pandemic, because the underlying theme of this festival is no man is an island. I'm sure from those of us on this little island here called Britain, we know very well the poem from which this line comes by John Donne. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes if I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And today we have 2 global figures showing us we're very much not an island. We begin our first speaker, who, as goes, needs no introduction, KABIR Bedi, an international movie star in India, and he is here. We have given him 1 tree because this festival is very much associated with ecology, keeping with Khushwant Singh's concerns for a green planet and his abiding interest in nature. And his description of the monsoon in his best-selling book, Train to Pakistan, has been hailed among the most evocative in literary circles. This festival, I have to say, is a non-profit festival with the help of sponsors and crowdfundings, and it's supported using public funding by the National Lottery through the Arts Council, England. So I introduce our first session, KABIR Bedi, moderated by Sarah Jacob. We'll have around 45 minutes of them in discussion, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. Let me first introduce Sarah, who is a journalist, a senior editor at NDTV 24/7, an anchor of We the People, one of their flagship primetime shows. You may know her previously when she was US correspondent for NDTV covering the presidential elections in 2012. She's reported extensively also on the environment and part of the series titled Save India's travelling the coastline. And Kabir Bedi, perhaps one of the first crossover Indian stars who's worked across continents, working in Bollywood, in Europe and Hollywood. He's worked in film, television and theatre. He's best known perhaps in the UK for his role in Octopussy. He worked in the American series The Bold and the Beautiful, and in his blockbuster series Sandokan, if that's how I pronounce it, made in Italy. And he has had honours internationally in Italy's role in the series and as part of the Oscars. His list of achievements is so long, I will eat into your 45 minutes. Do please look on the website if you need updating, because today he's now added a new medium to his portfolio with his book, his autobiography, Stories I Must Tell, The Emotional Life of an Actor. And I've started reading the book, which arrived yesterday. And I must say it's absolutely gripping. It's short stories talking about particular people and places. And as I read it, you know, his move from Delhi to Bombay was wonderful. His encounters with figures like the Beatles, his relationships, which is so well known. And indeed, 2 years ago at the last festival we had in person, the biography of his mother was one of the very exciting features then. And of course, his dealing with the mental health of his son is very moving. Before I hand you over to Sarah, may I just remind you to key questions on YouTube or Facebook or Insta, and Sarah will take some of your questions after their discussion. Welcome very much to you both, and we look forward to this session.
Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's always a pleasure for me to be at the Khushwant Singh Literature Festival, but today is exceptionally special because I have an author here today whose life story really reads like a film script. There are twists, there are turns, there's passionate love, and there's deep heartbreaks, there's spiraling highs and the bottom of the barrel lows. Kabir Bedi, actor, author, even knight, congratulations on a wonderful book.
Thank you, Sarah. I deeply appreciate that. And I want to thank Rachel also for a wonderful introduction. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book, and I look forward to chatting about it with you.
So, Kabir, you know, personally, I was sucked into the book right away because it begins with your tryst with journalism, right? Your first chapter is about when you were a journalist. Out of, you know, one of those 9 lives that you've led was where you were a reporter. And as you put it there in the book, you say that you got an exclusive with the Beatles, face to face, Beatle by Beatle, a thrilling achievement for a 20-year-old freelance reporter who was then with All India Radio, which was a government monopoly. And you know, that's awesome. That's quite a coup. So as a reporter, when I read the book, some of the things that reached out to me was that you said when you first told your boss, they laughed at you and they thought it was impossible. Yet you persisted. And that was the thread that reached out to me in this entire book. A lot of gumption, a lot of drive. As a reporter, you figure out early that you have to put yourself out there in order to get the story.
Right.
And then there's luck. You went to interview the Beatles. You managed to get an interview with their manager, Brian Epstein, who ended up being unwell. And then he asked the Beatles to do a favor to them. This is in your book. And you got the interview. It's just surreal.
Right.
So,
Right.
Kabir, when you look back at your life, how much of it was grit, your passion, your ambition? How much of it was pure luck? As you say in your second chapter of your book, how much of it was by chance or by choice?
There are chances in life, Sarah, and there are choices. I think there's a mix of the two. I do believe that it's your choices that define your future. It's your choices that make you who you are. And I also believe that our beliefs are like magnets. And whatever we believe in firmly enough and the energy we put into them kind of creates, in a sense, attracts like a magnet attracts iron filings. It kind of attracts the elements of that reality that we're trying to form, and that reality starts to take shape. Of course, there are accidents. Of course, there are twists of fate. But I do believe that the boy that was persistent enough to get to the Beatles, the boy that turned his life around by leaving Delhi, a city that he grew up in, which he was comfortable in, because he realized he had to make other choices in life that were more fulfilling. That boy, the spirit of that boy, is what took me through all my life and all the times that I have changed careers or moved continents or pushed the envelope and go from Italy to Hollywood, whatever it took. That desire to push further and reinvent myself in some way has always been with me.
Yeah, I remember there was an audition that you were asked to fly yourself out to. I think it was to Sandokan. You know, most actors, given the success that you were an actor, then you were a recognizable face. Most actors probably would have let their egos respond, saying, you know, no, you have to fly me out there.
So that's one of the things that I learned very early in life, and that is learning to recognize opportunity. And it's very important because, I entered Bollywood. I had a successful film very early in my career, and I shot at being a leading man in Bollywood. But I didn't fancy myself as being a singing, dancing star. And I've always said I love singing and dancing in Bollywood films. It's an integral part of them. They do it more brilliantly than anybody in the world. It's like opera for the Italians. I don't question that. I enjoy watching them, but I'm not a singer, dancer myself, and I thought it'd be enough. And then I realized it wasn't enough. So I realized if I wanted a career abroad, I'd have to expand my horizons. So when the Italians came to town looking for an actor, and my name was mentioned to them, and I went to see them, and they liked what they saw, but they said, you've got to come at your own cost. For a moment, of course, I bristled. I'm an established actor. They can't just order me around. I'm not some starving newcomer. But I realized this could change my whole dynamic. It could be exactly what I'm looking for. So I accepted without a fuss, nailed my audition, and got the role, which went on to give me huge stardom in Europe. So all those things.
I think it was Fellini who said to you that luck matters, but the kind of success that you saw or that you've had, it's more than luck.
Yes. I was trying to be bashful. I said to Fellini, he said, congratulations, you made such an impact on my country. And I was with Parveen, and he was with Giulietta Sina, his wife and his muse, who he'd done many films with, who had won many awards for Best Actress. And to be invited out to Fellini was a huge honor. And when he met me and he saw the reactions, first he complimented me on my huge success. But when he saw the reaction of the people in the restaurant, he said, it's amazing what you've achieved. And I said, I was lucky to get the role, sir. And he said, luck is important, but this kind of success, so that was a huge compliment. And Fellini was one of my gods. I was, as a student at St. Stephen's College, I would queue up in the Film Festival of India to see these foreign films. They were the biggest source of foreign films and uncensored films by these masters of Italian cinema, the Luciano Visconti, Federico Fellini, the French directors, Alain Resnais, Agnes Varda, Jean-Luc Godard. All these we saw at the festival, and we had to queue up at night because a lot of people that attended these festivals queued up, but only to see nude scenes because they didn't see them in their own cinema. And I had to compete against the people that were looking for titillation rather than good cinema. Excuse me. So literally, I had to stand in lines all night to see Fellini films. And here he was inviting me to lunch, paying me these great compliments. It was extraordinary. to be honored like that. It was the greatest compliment I could have got. He was a god, like the Beatles were my gods. Because the Beatles also represented the era of the 60s, the most exciting era of the 60s, with all the incredible social change going on, flower power, the pill having been invented and giving people sexual freedom. And there was an air of rebellion in the air, and the Beatles symbolized all that. So the Beatles, Fellini, people were symbols of things that I absolutely admired and adored.
And yet that was the only interview that the Beatles gave in India on that trip.
So I believe.
And
so
you
I
called
didn't see any of that.
And yet you call it a scoop without glory, you say in your book. Why is that?
It was a scoop without glory because when I did the interview and I took it back to All India Radio, the staffers, they had no idea what I'd given them. This was broadcasting gold. I could have sold it to any network in the world and made a small fortune. And I could have done with the money. But they put it on without any fanfare. They said, and now I interview the Beatles. And suddenly put on the show late at night. So a lot of people didn't hear it. And this really angered me. And then what compounded it all was that they, a few days later when I went to get the tape, when I went to get the tape, I said, can I have a copy of the interview? I said, oh, they looked for it for a while. They said, no, we must have taped over it because you taped over an interview with the Beatles. We don't have money for tapes, we have to reuse tapes. And I understood their dilemma, but somebody should have known the value of it with the Beatles. This is one for the ages. So those are the things that actually made that interview a turning point in my life, where I was forced to reassess myself and think, do I really want to work in an organization like this? Do I really see a future for myself in this environment? Or do I need to reach out to something larger, bigger, more exciting, more fulfilling? And that's the journey that took me to Bombay.
Well, you were
because you're
ahead of your time.
Sorry?
You were ahead of your
Sorry?
time in more ways than one, with the Beatles interview being deleted. But chronologically, you begin your book in the start with your relationship with Pratima Bedi, who you went on to marry and have 2 children with. You were known to have an open marriage, and you were celebrated as path breakers, heralding a new era of permissiveness, as you said. While globally the Beatles were symbols, in India, you both were. But interestingly, you say in your book it wasn't by choice; it was not your choice.
Well, it was an age that was changing all around us. And we reveled in being the forerunners of a whole new age, of a whole new liberated attitude towards things. The Jew gang, the very bohemian gang, we had a very chilled out view of the world. And the marriage with Pratima began like a traditional marriage, okay? Well, not quite a traditional marriage. She was already when I got to us. It began like that. Now, how a relationship goes from there to becoming an open marriage, what are the circumstances? What are the dramas that take place? What are the things that make a normal marriage into an open marriage? That I've shared in my book, and I don't want to elaborate on that too much. But there is a process that you go through. And I think open marriage seemed like a good idea at first, but in the end, it didn't work. And why it didn't work again, I've shared that. Because these are things that not many people experience in their lives, but I wanted to share that experience and share that journey with all the emotional turbulence that it involves, all the thrills and chills of having a relationship that's turbulent.
And it was you who moved on first after you met Parveen Babi, because you wanted, as you put it in the book, you wanted intimacy, love, and fidelity.
Sorry?
It was you then who moved on because you wanted intimacy, love, and fidelity.
Yes, yes. And why that was also, I've talked about it, because on stage, I reveled in having that sexual freedom. What caused me to change, that also explored my book. But Parveen at that stage gave me exactly what I was looking for, which was a love that is entirely committed, entirely focused, and faithful, with an intensity that I had missed for a long time. Because one of the things that happens in an open marriage is that the level of intimacy, the caring and sharing that you give each other somehow diminished, and that saddened me. But I don't want to get into that too much. I think people need to discover that for themselves in the book, because
Sure.
that is part of the joy of reading my book, to know what happens in the process.
I want to talk a little bit about loss, because as much as this book is about your incredible highs, it's also about dealing with painful loss. First, Parveen Babi, then also, of course, your son, to whom you've dedicated this book, both of whom suffered from mental health issues. You speak very movingly of your son's suicide, of how you saw all the warning signs, how you did the most that anyone could. You gave him access to the best doctors. You were in America and California at that point of time, only then to see him take his own life. As a parent, I cannot imagine what that feels like or could have felt like. But it's been over 2 decades since this happened. Could you talk to us a little bit about your own recovery from this tragedy? How did you process your grief, and how difficult was it to revisit this in order to write your book, the craft of being able to separate the personal from the need to be honest to a reader who's spending money on picking up your book?
Good question, Sarah. Good question. And let me deal with the latter part. It was something I wanted to share, because I think it's very important to share what happens in a situation like that. What happens when a son comes to a father and says, I'm thinking of committing suicide? What do you do? How do you deal with it? How do you kind of avert that? And what are the circumstances of that medical condition that in a sense get in the way of that also? So, but for me, to revisit all that was very important, because I wanted to share that. So that revisitation itself was traumatic in its own way, because it reopened wounds that had actually become scars. The pain had diminished, but the scars remained. Now I had to reopen the scars and say, go back into that and relive that whole experience, to put it down. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it was necessary. And my feeling, Sarah, was that, and I must say, today's medicines are much better. So it's not a story that where people lose hope, or people should lose hope. But the aftermath of something like that, the guilt one feels, is enormous. No matter how much you did, everyone connected with a person who passed away has a sense of guilt. I could have done something, or said something to them, changed their course. And in this pandemic, so many people have lost so many loved ones, or known of people that they admire who passed away. So there is a sense of loss right now, is we've lost a way of life, we've lost people we love. And there is a sort of mourning that is going on at various levels. And mourning has its time. It must be given its time, given its place. But at the end of the day, the healing has to begin. And we have to find ways of moving on with life and honoring the memory of the dead, because the dead would want us to live. And therefore, whatever it took to recover that, I did. And unfortunately, his suicide came at a time when I was also financially down in the dumps. So it was a double whammy. And I really had to resurrect myself from the ruins of that state of being, emotionally, financially, materially, in every way. And again, you have to go back into enormous inner sources and give yourself the strength and say, I will overcome, I will rise again, I will not accept defeat.
You've been a partner to and a father to someone who struggled with mental health issues, right? You've lived with loved ones dealing with mental health issues in different decades. That was in the 70s and I think in the late 1990s. You say the medication is better today. Have things changed? Have they improved? We saw last year the death of a upcoming promising young man and actor, Siddharth Singh Rajput, and we saw the complete mangling of his mental health status in the public arena.
Which is horrible. But cures, I believe, are much better today. Management of the condition is much better today. I mean, I think the vulgarity of the way they treated Sushant Singh Rajput's passing was horrendous, and it's shameful what people made of that and did with that. Because, but I don't want to get into that particular thing, because essentially there's always a stigma to people with mental health problems, and I'd like people to not have that stigma, because firstly there is the afflicted one who's suffering from it, and then there is the caregiver who is also dealing with that. And I think the caregivers suffer as much as the afflicted one, because they are trying to adjust to somebody that they love, and they're dealing with somebody who they love, but that person is not the person that was. He's become something has changed within them. So it's very unfair that there's this stigma. We should look with great compassion on the afflicted as well as the caregivers in a situation like that.
Kabir Bedi, you touched upon this, but basically since from 1995, you faced a series of professional and financial, as you put it, professional, financial and emotional disasters. You said you rose from the ashes of stunning misfortunes, traumatic experiences that ruined you, left you shattered. You talked about bouts of depression. Again, I want to ask, was it difficult to write about this, now about yourself? Especially having dealt with two loved ones who've lost their lives to mental health issues, and being an actor in a profession where perception is very important. So you are straddling both the worlds, or you have one foot in the world of acting and in the other foot being an author.
Yes. Well, there are two different questions, really. One is, how do you deal with that? Those reverses? How do you rise from that situation? And the other thing is writing about it. You know, at the time going through it, it was very, very traumatic for me. And I came to terms with that, and I moved on. Now, as an author, I had a choice. Either I can whitewash it and make it look like a nice airbrushed painting, telling people what a great man I am and how everything was roses, but it wasn't. And I chose to just tell it like it was, because I think that's the real story. The real story is the story of being human, of seeing amazing triumph, success that actors dream of but never achieve or rarely achieve. And then seeing the absolute depths of personal sorrow, financial ruin, great loves, great losses. That's the drama of life. That is the essence of being human. I've seen it in its most extreme in some ways. And I thought, I've got a good story to tell you, and I must tell it. And I think the best thing I could do would be to tell it as honestly as I can, as authentically as I can, so people can share my journey vicariously. And I take them, and you see in this book, I've written it I haven't just talked in general terms. I've done it very vividly through scenes, through actual encounters, through dialogue, through mapping the emotional journey. That's why I call this book The Emotional Life of an Actor, because it is beyond my worldwide travels, my emotional canvas as well. What is it like to have enormous success? What are the pitfalls of it? And how does it affect you emotionally? What does it do to a man? A boy from Delhi who suddenly gets extraordinary success, suddenly faces terrible ruin. What does it feel like emotionally? What do you go through? That's the journey I want to write about and share and take people on that journey with me.
You certainly have an incredible story. So the raw material is all there. But in terms of craft, then how did you document, facts, figures? Was it memory? Did you happen to keep a diary? Because, for example, the chapter about your parents, which to me was an amazing story. I had no idea, obviously, that they were part of India's freedom struggle. Your mother was a handpicked satyagrahi of Gandhi and their time in Kashmir, but you were a child then. So in terms of craft as an author,
yes, no, the period, you're right. The period before independence I wasn't there at all. I was just born on the cusp of India's independence. Everything that I talk about, their lives and their part in the Indian freedom struggle, and her being a satyagrahi and my father being a flaming communist, all those were things I heard through family folklore, as well as the fact that I was lucky that 3 books have been written on my mother, one by Andrew Whitehead, one by Naomi Levine, and one by Vicky Mackenzie. 3 books have been written on her mother because it's an extraordinary story of this woman who goes from revolution to religion and then rises to the highest ranks of Buddhism and becomes the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. I mean, that's and an English woman who comes to fight for India's freedom. So she's a great story in herself. And my father's a great story in himself because he too had his incredible moments of revelation, which I share in the book, and developed his own philosophy, despite having the greatest reverence for our Sikh tradition. We are descendants of Guru Nanak, and him writing books on Guru Nanak and how he made that transition. And then I also had letters by them and to me, to each other. So I was able to quote letters and very poignant letters from my mother to me, from my father writing about my mother. Then there were audio recordings that my mother left behind, which I'd kept very carefully. So, and in fact, I provided the source material of a lot of the books that were written on my mother. Although I must add that Andrew Whitehead's immaculate research and knowledge of India and the Kashmir situation added to my knowledge. But so that period of my life, I certainly had a lot of sources to draw on. The other periods of my life, I did largely from memory because I could only tell stories about things I remember. I had to go back and double check some dates and do a little research. And I also had a number of letters. For instance, in my chapter on Parveen, I quote her letters. There were letters I wrote to her, she wrote to me. And those were very rich in terms of the way we would speak to each other or address each other and the kind of intensity of the love that we felt for each other. That can only come through actual words spoken at that time. And that's what I've been able to share in my book.
But so why now then? Why did you write? Because this is an incredible story. It could have been written anytime. Why did this book happen now?
Various reasons. I've always been talking about writing a book, and work would always intervene or other things would come in the way. Because when you're, say, shooting a film, you get completely absorbed in that. There's no way you can write a book in that process. You rise at all hours, go to all locations, meet all kinds of strange people, do all kinds of strange things. It's another process. But I think largely the hesitation in me was because I didn't know how to tell it. I knew I had a great story, how to tell it. And I made a number of attempts and then they all ended up in the waste paper basket because I was bored with my own writing. I said, I would read this book. Nobody but the most diehard fan would want to read this book. And then I had about a year ago, when the pandemic began, and I really said, I've got to do this. And I sat down and thought about it. I had this epiphany of how I could tell this using the story of the short story form and telling it as a series of short stories, which taken together tell the stories of my life, and they're not necessarily sequential. So they go back and forth in time. That gave me a lot of freedom to talk about things in different contexts, but when you put it all together, you see what my life was. So that was an interesting breakthrough for me. And I'd come to a point in my life where either I wrote my story or I didn't. So I thought, no, this is the time, and I've got to do it. It wasn't like that great saying of Martin Luther King, the time is always right to do what is right. I could have written this 15 years ago, but I do believe that having waited this long has enriched the book, because I've been able to see myself and my younger self with more dispassionate eyes, more compassionate eyes, more understanding. And I think this was very much a thing I wanted to do. And when I finally did the book, the satisfaction I had of holding a complete book in my hand was pure euphoria, pure euphoria. I said, I've finally done it. And I've been so gratified by the response my book has got. I couldn't ask for a bigger reward.
So would you say you're an author now? Can we expect more? Do you still write? Do you keep the practice? I'm not sure. I think how authors like to write a few hours every day. Do you still keep that going? Are we going to expect more from you?
I will. And let me pay tribute to Khushwant Singh here, because he was the one who gave me some very good advice on writing, which I applied. And I've spoken of this in a few other forums too. I said to him, Khushwantji, how do you write so much? You write books, you do lectures, you write articles, you edit magazines. He said, phone chakke rakhte ho. So pick up the phone, put it down. And those were the days of landlines. So it wasn't putting down your mobile. It meant pick the landline phone off the hook and put it down so nobody can call you. It's one of the biggest distractions. I said, that's fine. What else is then you have to make time. You have to make sure you have a certain number of hours where you just sit and write and don't do anything else. And I did that. In fact, I put a huge chunk of time aside. And thanks to those two things that he told me, I structured my day accordingly. And I've always loved writing, but I wasn't a writer because I didn't write regularly. And there's a difference between being able to write and becoming a writer. I've enjoyed this process so enormously that I certainly will keep writing. Because I have many other ideas, many other stories, many other concepts that I want to put down. In fact, again, as a tribute to Khushwant Singh, one of the earliest short stories that I wrote when I was 29 years old, he put in his Best Indian Short Stories collection, which is a great honor for me also. And I put that in my book as well. So Khushwant Singh has been an influence in my life. He was a friend. He knew my parents during the freedom struggle days. He'd come to the huts where we all lived in Lahore and visit. He wasn't a violent agitator, but he was certainly a sympathizer. And that relationship of friendship always continued with Khushwant Singh, even after I was in Bombay and he was in Delhi. And I would meet him at London from time to time and have lovely meals with him. He was a great guy. He was truly a wonderful human being to be with, a great raconteur, a man of enormous knowledge, and real down-to-earth, no-nonsense humor. I enjoyed Khushwant. He was a great, great man, and I'm privileged to call him my friend.
And life comes full circle. Here you are talking
at
about
the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival, yes.
Literary Festival. Well, talking about people who've been instrumental in your life, influential, Parveen Babi, of course, you say terrible things were written about you. You say that it wasn't a fair perception of what actually happened. Kabir Bedi, you know, it's a thin line when you're writing a book that speaks of someone who's no longer there to defend themselves. How did you as an author navigate that? Did that play out in your mind at all?
Sir, I just decided to tell it like it is. And I spoke about things that were unfair to me or things that other people did wrong, but I didn't spare myself either. I was equally hard on myself where I went wrong, where I made mistakes, where I could have done things differently. And what happened when Parveen and I finally ended our relationship, or rather she ended it, because I'd got her the lead role in my next film and she came back from London to continue her career in Bollywood. Of course, the Bollywood press made a meal of it. They said, you know, Parveen has been unhinged because Kabir Bedi rejected her and she's come back as a mental case and she's become crazy because of it and he's the man to blame. Oof. And I didn't say anything at the time because I thought in the end truth will out. She needs the sympathy. She needs to resurrect her career, etc. But I've spoken about it now because I think it's important to set the record straight. But I hope I was kind to her in my whole depiction of our relationship, our the way everything happened, because there's no malice inside me. There's no vindictiveness inside me. I didn't set out to do a hatchet job on anybody, Pratima or Parveen. I think I was able to navigate that fine line between saying, yes, that was wrong. Yes, that was part of their nature or not. This is my mistake. A fine line, and keep a certain balance so that you don't look as though you have an agenda here to do a hatchet job on somebody. It wasn't that. It was saying we were younger then, we were more passionate, we had our problems, and this is the best we did at the time, and this is what happened. And I think that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes that journey interesting, because you see us all as young, fallible, passionate people. And that's what I tried to capture.
And talking about yourself, you say, I mean, both the women that you loved most deeply in the start that you were involved with were fiercely competitive, who you say wanted to be the center of attention. You said Pratima loved publicity with a passion. You were also carried away by the excitement of it all. Is it difficult to be in love with an actor?
Yes, I think because the demands of an actor's life create all kinds of pressures. And to have two actors under the same roof certainly creates additional pressures. There's a chapter on Pratima, there's a chapter on Parveen. But at the end of the day, it's my life I'm talking about. I'm talking about what happened to me through my eyes in relation to both those characters, those wonderful women whose memory I still treasure for all that they gave me, even though I mourn all that they took away from me too.
Well, two of your...
Sorry,
carry on.
No. I said it is difficult to be married to actors, dancers who are highly strung in certain ways, who have an extra kind of nervous and creative energy about them. And if you're an actor yourself, you have your own needs and demands. You have your own idiosyncrasies as well. So that no relationship is easy, but I think in those circumstances, the relationship becomes that much more complicated.
Well, two of your loves have passed, but you say you've managed to stay friends with all of your wives, your exes. In fact, I saw on Instagram, Nikki Bedi, your wife of 12 years, has even given a strong endorsement, loving endorsement of the book. How does one manage that? Because you also say in the book at the same time that the breakup of a relationship is always painful, it's always messy, and even more complicated when there are children involved.
Yes. In Nikki's case, fortunately, there weren't any children involved. In Nikki's case, we were just we came together because I was playing Othello and she was my Desdemona, and the passion on the screen entered our lives, and to the shock and consternation of everybody, Nikki and I married, and then she wanted, at the end when I started coming back from Hollywood and was in England, she wanted to stay in England, I wanted to come back to India. And so, in the best interest of all, we went our separate ways. And Nikki, I have admired the enormous success she's had as a broadcaster in England. She is absolutely one of the stars of BBC Radio, does the Arts and Culture Hour with a brilliance that is a masterclass in conducting those things. So I'm very pleased by her success. And I regard it as one of my achievements that I'm able to remain friends with my ex-wives, because as any divorced person will tell you, that's not an easy thing to do. And as I put in my book that wonderful picture of Ishel, my American wife, and Pratima, my Indian ex-wife, together with Nikki and me in our home at the time, sharing dinner around a Christmas tree. So the fact that Nikki endorses my book so strongly just shows that, even she recognizes how difficult it must have been for me to write that, and how thrilled she was by how I wrote it. And she was one of my severest critics. So to get that praise from her is real high praise. And I really think Nikki's extraordinary in what she's achieved in the years that she's continued to live in England. And I'm very proud of her.
I'm going to quickly just take a break and ask if we should take questions from the viewers right now. Meanwhile, if you can just send them to me. Otherwise, meanwhile, I want to also ask, Kabir, you've written very courageously about what was in hindsight turned out to be very poor investments in the stock market at a time when there was great euphoria in the late 1990s.
Can you imagine? I almost went bankrupt betting that Apple would succeed, and Apple went down. Today, it's the most valuable company in the world. So it's not the long term that works in the stock market. It's the short term that kills you dead if you're on the wrong side of the move. It's ironic. Many things, many wonderful learnings in this book. I didn't set it out, write this as a kind of, these are the 9 lessons of my life kind of book. That I think emerges from what people experience and see, or things that I did right and wrong, things that were right and wrong that were done to me. All those things are implicit. They're not sort of underlined as the 9 great lessons of my life. But since I have led 9 lives, there are many lessons implicit in it.
I think I'm getting some questions here. It says, Serena says, I salute you for having lived a life to the hilt and brought it out with such candor and honesty. I wish to know what would be your last word on life, love, and human relationships through your prism.
Oh boy, what would be my last words on through my prism? Life is an incredible gift. Time is our most precious resource. Celebrate life for whatever joys it can give you, whatever evolution it can bring to your life, and for whatever joy you can bring to the lives of others. That's what I say in a nutshell. But above all, be kind. Be kind. We're all travelers in the same boat.
Sure. Well, I apologize. That question was actually from Subhash Sharma. And there's another question here from Daman Chatwal, who wants to know, what is the most surprising thing you discovered about yourself while writing this book?
The most surprising thing I discovered about myself while writing this book is how I survived it. I think in some ways my survival is a miracle. Somebody up there must love me, because the risks that I took and were astonishing. It was like doing a trapeze act without a net, and at times I fell. So how I survived that journey with all the uncertainties of the film business is truly a miracle that has surprised me, for which I'm most grateful. But to me, it's almost incomprehensible how I did that. But I did, and that's my story.
Babette Plitz has a question. She has a question regarding the process of writing. How often have you reviewed or reread your book before you felt or knew that this is, the final version exactly how you wanted it to be?
Sorry. I wrote the book in a fevered frenzy over 6 months, the first draft. Then I turned to my 3 wise men, Jess and Dakuna, of my first advertising guru, Andrew Whitehead, who wrote the book on my mother, Carlo Pizzati, a brilliant writer who's married to the poet Tishani Doshi, and because I wanted the Italian point of view as well. And their comments made me review my book a little. Then, of course, I had my wife, Parveen Dosanjh, give me her insights. And then over another 3 months, I sat down and reviewed it and reworked some portions, cut out a few portions. There were a few other friends that I asked for their opinions, but not too many people, because I didn't want this to be a manuscript passed around by everybody willy-nilly. So the revisions actually go on till the moment the editor yanks it out of your hands before it goes to printing. But the fundamental revisions were completed in 3 months after I wrote it. So, like any good baby, it took 9 months to be born.
And Deepa Raghavan Sethi wants to ask, was this catharsis for you, this baby?
As I've said in a couple of other forums too, yes, it was catharsis, but it was also revelatory. It was also being able to see myself with fresh eyes. Catharsis because I had to relive it and let it flow from me. But it's also a journey of discovery. Really looking at my life with fresh eyes is a whole new process for me. So yes, it was catharsis, but it was more than catharsis. It was re-looking at my whole life, which was very important. Can I ask you a question, Sarah? Since all these people ask me questions, was there a particular part of the book that was your favorite?
I was blown away by the parents, your chapter on your parents. I was completely surprised by that. I have to say, unfortunately, a lot of people, we go by perceptions, right? I was not expecting that. I was not expecting the history. I was not expecting, your mother. She could have been British. That I could have believed. But the fact that she was a Britisher who moved to India, fought for India's independence, took a few months old baby with her to Kashmir, all of that, to me, I thought that was was a great chapter.
There's just a remarkable story, and I was very fortunate that, very blessed that I'm their son, but also, had they even not been my parents, it would still have been a remarkable story that I would like to have read about, and fortunately I was able to be the one who wrote it. And I have to thank the 3 authors who did the books on my mother for giving me various nuggets of information, for which I've thanked them in the book as well, but for increasing my awareness of my mother's achievements and accomplishments. She was the architect of Buddhism in the West in so many ways. And how that happened and how that transformation happens to a person, what were the moments of illumination that changed her life, all that I've shared in my book. And I was part of that journey. So I was able to talk about it in a very personal way.
Well, that chapter, of course, the chapter about your son, of course. Himanshu Veshampayan asks, he's a Lintas alumni and would welcome your views about your interactions with Alak Padamsee.
Yes. Since I spent almost 5 years of my life in advertising, starting with Lintas and later Oguri Matha, my greatest fortune was I had a friend in radio in Delhi called Janki Gaur. And when he learned that I was planning to go to Bombay, he said, meet my friend, he's a good chap. That good chap turned out to be Jason D'Cunha, who was the creative head of Lintas at the time. And Jason gave me my first job in advertising. And again, by some divine serendipity, Alak Padamsee was my immediate boss. And I was trained by him in filmmaking and later cast by him in theater. So Alak Padamsee was an extremely hardworking, very brilliant man whose campaigns were legendary. Sure. I've described him as a man who stood like a question mark. That was his form and he loved his open waistcoats and a goatee beard. But he was the god of the English theatre in Bombay. And his casting me in the lead role of Tughlaq, which is Girish Karnad's first play, transformed my life. It suddenly brought me to the attention of Bollywood, which then led to various other things and various other adventures and discoveries. But Alec, I've always thanked as being one of the key people in my life that helped me along the way. The other was Reverend Llewellyn, who was my principal at Sherwood College, because he made sure that I got a first when leaving school by making me work hard at subjects as weekend, because of which I got into St. Stephen's, because of which many other things followed. So, these are people who you cannot thank enough in your heart. And Alec Padamsee is one of those people, as is Justin Acuna, who has been a role model for me ever since I first met him in Lintas. These are great men, and they affected my life deeply, and I'm eternally grateful to them for it.
Well, as you say, be kind, probably pass it on, all of these people who mentored you and had a role to play in this incredible life of yours. I think we should let's take one last question here. Vidya Mishra has a question. She says, a lot of times it feels like the world is getting less liberal now in terms of accepting radical ideas, especially about the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. What are your views on this?
Society is always in a state of flux. In the 1960s and 70s, which are the most exciting decades to live, and I think over the last century, we believed we were changing the world and bringing in a more liberal order. In some senses, that trend has continued. Yes, there are cases of hotheads and zealots trying to impose their morality on people. But in general, even in India, I'd say today's society is more liberal than it was before. Women today have a far greater sense of self and self-control in their lives than they had before. They are not just, they're seen as partners. And if they're not willing to accept that. We are now in the age of Tinder, which would have been shocking beyond belief in the 60s and 70s. So things are more liberal at the social level, even in terms of some hotheads, there might be an attempt to limit freedoms, etc., in social ways. But it's really, if you look at the country as a whole, I think we are far more liberal. When I and Fatima lived together, it was newspaper headlines. They lived together without being married. Today, any number of people are living together. It's not even subject for headlines. So times have changed, and they are more liberal than they were in our times. I don't think we're going backwards, we're going forwards.
All right. We're going forwards, not backwards. I'm going to just squeeze in one last question. It's from Geeta Choksi. She's also a mother who's lost a child, and she asks, don't you get tired of people saying how brave you are? Losing a child is the ultimate tragedy for a parent.
Well, losing a child is the ultimate tragedy for a parent, no question. Well, brave is something you see in retrospect. What you have to have at the time is the courage to push ahead, the courage to allow for mourning, and yet know that life beyond and that you have to move on. Brave is what you call yourself in retrospect. Courage is what you need at the time of misfortune. And I believe that I must thank the inner strength that my parents gave me through the example of their lives and the courage to be different, which said, you can take the path less trodden, you can live a different life. It may not be as easy as the normal lives or normal professions, but at the end of it, it could be far more fulfilling. And that strength, inner strength, and that courage to keep going down the unusual path I got from my parents, as well as my own meditative practices that I learned early in life. And what I learned from the example of other people that I admire. Bravery comes if you have it in you.
Kabir Bedi, thank you so much. Those who have lost and loved, who have loved and lost would agree completely. This is a great book. I recommend everyone read it because it's an honest book. It's very candid. So thank you for that. And as you say, you're going to write more. So we look forward to more of that. Rachel, it's back to you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you,
just
Sarah.
showing
Thank you for
my
your lovely
copy here.
questions.
What a lovely interview. I thought that was great. And, you know, the way that, I mean, although I thought there was so much in the book, that more came out even today in the questions. And I'm feeling nostalgic for that old Bombay and the characters I know, like Jerson and Alec and Girish. And, you know, one of the things that I felt was this a more liberal India, perhaps, than the one we today? This world, and Kabir, you, and then later you're making it a very liberal, atmosphere. And I wondered if I could squeeze that little question in at the end.
Rachel, as I said earlier, I think there are instances of intolerance in India, but overall, I think society has moved forward. In general, people in towns, even in small towns, are far more tolerant of freedoms that young people enjoy today, which would have been unthinkable in our time. People are more fluid in their relationships. People are less tolerant of just being thrown into a marriage which is a loveless marriage, or partners that don't respect them. I feel we are moving forward, in spite of the instances of intolerance that you might occasionally see.
And thank you for that. And how wonderful, you know, this book and this interview brought out the theme of No Man is an Island. I loved the way it was about you very personally, and yet how much you brought these other people into your world, and you talked about them with kindness, so important, you know, and not really trying to take revenge or to justify things that you had done. I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. Sarah, thank you so much for bringing all this out today. And I hope, I don't know if the book's available yet.
There's so much more to go.
It's not available yet in England. I hope to find an equally good publisher in England. As West End has been in India, and Mondadori will be in Italy. Let's hope I find a lovely publisher in England too.
Thank you all for this session, which I will now close, and hope to see many of you at the next session at 2 o'clock.
Thank you, Rachel.